Today at 8 a.m. the doorbell wakes me up. Opening my eyes, I go to open them. My friend is on the threshold, looking a little disheveled. He speaks from the doorway. "San, don't be surprised, but you have to listen to me. I know you love all sorts of mystical stories. Now listen to mine. Just don't laugh." But I must say that my friend always made fun of me, saying that I read and believe in all sorts of crap. Well, I wasn't offended by him. I invited him into the kitchen, and then he takes out a bottle of cognac. By the way, he doesn't drink, only on holidays, and even then purely symbolically. And then in the morning there's cognac. Well, he told me this story, accompanied by the rhythmic knocking of glasses of cognac and the crunch of pistachios. Further in his words, "San, you know, a year ago I bought an apartment in Khrushchev on the 4th floor for my grandmother alone. She moved in with the children. This is a normal apartment. Literally the next day after moving in the evening there was a knock on the door, although there was a bell. Well, I thought it was neighbors. I went to open it and saw that the grandmother was standing on the threshold. God forbid what she looked like. Her face was gray, swollen, her eyes were invisible, and her smell was even worse. Speaks. Call Valya. Valya was the name of the former owner of the apartment. Well, I tell her that she doesn't live here anymore, and she looks at me and doesn't leave. Well, I politely said goodbye and closed the door. I decided to look through the peephole, and she stood near the door and looked. It felt like she was looking at me. Then she turned around and barely hobbled up the stairs. She walked one flight for about 3 minutes. I also thought then that she had a problem with her legs. I wanted to help, but she smelled too bad. The next day, the situation repeats itself, but after explaining that Valya has moved out, my grandmother asks me, "Don't you have any bread?" Well, I'm a compassionate person. I cut off half a loaf of bread, gave it to her, and she hobbled away quietly. And so it began every day until she asked to lend money. Then the very next day, I decided to ask the grandmothers, who always sit at the entrance, about this neighbor. They said that she was a good-for-nothing, wasting her entire pension on booze, and then going to the neighbors to beg, that no one had opened her door for a long time or given her anything, which, in principle, turned out to be the case. The 1,000 of his own, which he gave her, didn't see it anymore. I also found out that her granddaughter lives in a neighboring house, but she's not at all interested in her grandmother, and if someone reminds her of her, she immediately starts snapping at her. Well, in general, this old woman walked like this every day. I stopped opening it for her. I just looked through the peephole. She would knock for a couple of minutes, stand there, turn around and leave, barely hobbling, holding the railing with both hands. Then she stopped showing up, and later I found out that she was sent to a nursing home. Well, okay, I forgot. About a year has already passed. I slept 2 nights ago. A persistent knock on the door wakes me up. I go to the door and look through the peephole. Again she, a neighbor, discharged, I think, from a nursing home or disappeared on her own, as always, in her usual attire. Naturally, I didn't open it because I was wearing shorts and it was uncomfortable. Well, I look through the peephole and she's standing there, and again I have the feeling that she's looking at me. It's already somehow creepy. She stood there for a while and went upstairs, only not as usual, but in reverse, while staring at my door. And it's so fast. Of course, I was taken aback, but I didn't pay much attention. I thought maybe they had gotten some treatment, and that's why the grandmother had a special way of moving. The next night, everything repeated itself. I was already in a slight stupor, to say the least. What was especially striking was her ability to run up the stairs backwards. Yesterday morning, I left the house, and on the street was a local police officer, my neighbor's granddaughter, and some other government officials. I learned from the ubiquitous grannies on the bench that my neighbor, who came at night, died 2 days ago in a nursing home. In general, after quietly thinking about it, who was knocking on my door then, I fall into shock, but without saying anything to anyone, I quietly retreat. I sleep this night. Knock. And so strong too. I'm blown away. I go up to the door. I look through the peephole with caution. She, neighbor, don't remember her that way. And he's looking right at me. And it seems like she's just standing there, and the door is shaking. And I became so scared that my vision blurred. I sat down out of fear, and in this position I moved into the room, lay down on the bed and listened for a long time to the door shaking and knocking on it. Either I passed out, or it just stopped in the morning. But as soon as it was dawn, I got dressed, took a bottle of cognac and began to wait at the door peephole for one of the neighbors to come out. He waited, and I left my apartment at the same time as them, so that I wouldn't be alone in the entrance, and straight to you. In general, I don't know what it was, but I advised my friend to find out the name of my neighbor. He didn't even know her name, and go light a candle in the church for her repose. Story 2. Necromancer Cat. Baba Zina had a necromancer cat. His usual entertainment was to revive a mouse corpse and play with it, as cats usually play with captured mice. When the unfortunate mouse died again, the cat buried the tortured rodent in the front garden until the next resurrection, which usually happened the very next day. Everyone loved the cat, with rare exceptions, because he had a kind character, was handsome and photogenic. At the same time, I believed that I was the only one who knew his secret, but one day it turned out that this was not so. One morning, I looked out the window and saw Grandfather Kislia in the front garden. Kislia was an alcoholic, quite harmless, but still, he belonged to the few inhabitants of our house who did not love Baba Zina's cat. The cat, don't be a fool, answered the same to his grandfather. As a result, there was a sluggish war between the cat and the alcoholic, not that it was very serious, but their confrontation could not be called completely humorous. So, one day an alcoholic managed to pour a whole bucket of water on a cat. However, he was not happy for long. The very next day, the cat climbed into his apartment through the window. My grandfather lived on the first floor, ate a chicken that had been forgotten on the stove, and tore all the curtains into picturesque rags, and so on and so forth. And now Grandfather Kislia was poking around in the front garden. When I went out onto the balcony, he had already dug up the cat's favorite dead mouse with a tablespoon and was examining it, fearlessly picking it up by the tail. And when he noticed me, he smiled broadly, showing his sparse teeth, and literally said the following: "That's where he gets his fun, the lousy one. Now we'll puzzle him." He pulled out another mouse from his pocket, neat and shiny, with a skin of a very bright acid green color, and threw it into the hole where the dug one had been lying. And he calmly put the dug one in his pocket. Plastic, the alcoholic boasted, burying the hole. Skeleton made of wire, skin 100% synthetic. Watch how he gets along with her, okay? You will tell me later, but I need to run errands, and he won't come while I'm around. I just nodded vaguely. I was so surprised. And Grandfather Kislia, raising his imaginary hat as a sign of farewell, walked away through the bushes in the direction of the nearest grocery store, feeling his dubious trophy in his pocket. Half an hour later, Zenon's cat showed up in the front garden. As usual, he dug up the mouse from its usual place and stared at it in complete amazement. After sitting completely still for a while, the cat let out his characteristic short meow, after which the dead mouse always came to life. But this mouse did not come to life. After all, it was artificial, and the ritual performed by the cat had no effect on it. The cat repeated the meow, but nothing changed. Then he walked around the mouse, sat again for a while, and meowed again. Once again, the plastic mouse showed no signs of life. The cat walked around the mouse again, sat motionless again, and meowed again, and I discerned hysterical notes in his meow. It looks like the cat is starting to get nervous, but this time, nothing happened either. The cat walked around the mouse again, sat motionless again, and meowed again, and I discerned hysterical notes in his meow. It looks like the cat is starting to get nervous, but this time nothing happened either. The cat walked around the mouse again, sat again, and meowed again. Nothing. The plastic mouse continued to lie motionless on the ground, glistening with its unnatural green fur. Well, what else could you expect? But the cat didn't give up trying. I was about to go to the kitchen to bring the cat some treat as a consolation, when suddenly, after another meow, the mouse began to move. Rising up on wire legs, she took several awkward steps, after which she quickly trotted off in the direction of the basement window, moving more and more confidently with every second. The cat only followed her with his eyes, without trying to catch her. One might have thought that he was simply very tired, if not for the obvious triumph clearly written on his face. And the next day, Grandfather Kislia was taken away by a psychiatric ambulance. At about 4 in the morning, he woke up his neighbors with a heart-rending scream and continued to scream, knock and rattle for another hour, until angry residents broke into his apartment along with the police. The following picture opened up to those who broke in. The grandfather, tightly clutching a hammer in his hand, was sitting on a bedside table placed on the kitchen table. The apartment was destroyed, and the floor, walls, furniture, and in general, everything looked as if Kislia had been frantically hitting it all with a hammer for a long time. Looking at those who broke in with a crazy look, the grandfather said a phrase that finally convinced everyone that he had developed delirium tremens. Plastic undead, skeleton made of wire, skin 100% synthetic, after which he was twisted and handed over to quickly arriving paramedics. He returned 2 weeks later, quiet, calm, handsome, in neat and clean clothes. He immediately went to church, from where he returned with a huge bottle of holy water. His drunken friends, who a couple of days later tried to go to his house out of old memory, were shamed by Kisley and sent home. But what they managed to notice in their grandfather's apartment, and what they later told everyone they met, was the almost complete absence of any furniture, amazing cleanliness and strong homemade baseboards, which the grandfather nailed down during their visit. In general, after that incident, Grandfather Kisley changed a lot. He stopped drinking, became devoutly religious, and spent most of his time in church, at services, or helping with housework. At the same time, he did not part with the eggplant filled with holy water, and when he met Zena's cat in the yard, he began to loudly read the Our Father and splash the eggplant on the cat. The cat, to Kislin's great satisfaction, behaved exactly as any evil spirit should, hissed and ran away. But it was difficult to get rid of the impression that the cat was simply playing along with the former alcoholic, and the grandfather, generally understanding everything, nevertheless continued his ceremonies, observing pathetic seriousness. So everything ended well, and even, one might say, returned to normal in an even better way. There's only one thing that worries me a little, that an artificial green mouse, animated by a necromancer cat, continues to live in the basement of our house. I live on the second floor, but, for example, the Vasiliev family, where 2 kids are on the first. And recently I heard one of them ask his mother why only one of all the toys, the smallest one, comes to life at night. It is unlikely that this mouse can harm a child or, especially, an adult. But it's easy to send an adult to a mental hospital for a long time for treatment, as happened with Kislia. An ordinary plastic mouse has a skeleton made of wire. The skin is 100% synthetic, but at the same time alive.